Welcome to our virtual discussion with Sam about his book, Mutations, The Many Strange Faces of Hardcore Punk. This discussion today may be one of those faces as well. My name's Ilya. I work with the Holland Project. We're an all ages arts and music space in Reno, Nevada. Sam is in Pomona, California, right, Sam?
Yes.
You can support the Holland Project in creating more all ages community programming like this stuff. We do workshops, we have an art gallery, we do music programming, and we have a membership program, and we'll drop that in the chat if you're interested. You can also just donate, and you can just stay up to date on the stuff that we're doing with a little link that will pop in the chat now too. So it's not incidental that I'm mentioning the Holland Project partially because I love the Holland Project, but one of the thematic lines running through Sam's book is that like the cultural world that grew up around hardcore music or underground music, whatever you want to call it, meaning everything that grew kind of around the bands, seems like that a lot of those things were maybe kind of the real lasting impact of this stuff. And, you know, like when the bands and all their songs are kind of long forgotten, so much of the other stuff like zines, art, political movements, alternative spaces like Holland, those are the things that stick around. And the Holland Project belongs to this lineage, right? It's a DIY space that began in 2007, kind of as a loose collective of people booking shows around Reno. And now we have our own space where normally we host live music, do art shows, workshops, after school clubs, craft fairs, and a lot of other stuff. I think in some ways we have you to thank, Sam, for kind of, this book came out at just the right time. Normally, you know, we'd all kind of be buried by going to too many shows, having too many commitments, and just the general inertia of doing crap, right? But 2020, I
was a big beneficiary of 2020.
You were, you were, and we're not.
It was weird.
Yeah, and we want
which I earned because the book I put out before came out like a week before Trump was elected and was gone. You know.
Yeah, so you got your comeuppance with this one, I think. You know, I think the fact that this was like a hard stop on everything, I think is kind of nice because it's given us a lot of time to sort of reflect on this stuff. And I think reading this book this year, I think was like the perfect time in a way for me at least to kind of think about what the past 40 years or whatever of alternative culture actually means. And it's kind of gives us the opportunity to think about, yeah, like where we came from, where we are now, where we might, you know, what we might want to go and do next, right? When we can do some stuff next. So Sam, like, let's start with, you left hardcore in 2004, right? You didn't know 2020 was going to happen. We're going to assume, we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. But 15 years later, you kind of put this book together, kind of more or less returning to this world that you had, you know, essentially left behind. So my first question is, why did you do that?
Which part, write the book or leave?
No, why'd you write the book?
I had written a bunch of pieces for the book anyway, and my plan was just to write stuff and put it in a drawer and not think about it for a while. But in writing the Born Against piece, I realized that my memories weren't lining up at all with the other people involved. And so it just made sense this is a really boring answer I'm giving you. It made sense to do this at this point in my life because all that stuff about you forgetting things is very real. And this is such a boring answer.
So you're saying that you were kind of doing it as sort of like a confessional, a personal thing.
No, I actually wasn't. The original idea was it was just a book about music. It was just a compilation of my writing about music. It had nothing to do with punk. And very slowly over the course of the not quite year it took to put everything together, it turned into this thing that sort of had a couple theses. And in doing that, it became much, much more difficult to write. It was a really bad experience. All around, just unhealthy mentally and physically. And also there were a few chapters that I had to leave out because I just hit a wall at the end. I mean, clearly there should be a Kill Rock Stars chapter because I've done a lot of work with them. And the thing that I was writing was not good. It just wasn't a good piece of writing. Somebody needs to really obviously write a good book about them, and there should be a good chapter about them in my book, and hopefully there will be someday, maybe in a subsequent printing.
What are the theses in your mind that run through the book?
I mean, there's a lot. All right, hold on. I'm going to cheat because I have the book right here.
Did you write this book?
This would be a weird way to be outed as like, well, I actually paid someone, but I paid a lot of money to have them write it. So I hadn't really realized how many things I had been a part of until I really got into it with this. Like the Youth of Today chapter was really late in the game that I realized that I was right there at the beginning of all of that stuff. And geographically, I wasn't quite in the center of it, but I was very close. The New York hardcore stuff obviously had a lot of resonance with Trump. And those were things I was noticing in real time, like the fact that Trump rallies, even after he was president, continued to look like New York hardcore shows. So these are all small theses. I mean, I don't know what the, I mean, I wrote it, so I don't know what the big things are. I'm just eating it on these answers.
Well, I'll tell you what I think some of the big things are. Like probably one of the main big things is kind of what I mentioned earlier, just sort of like about just how much stuff hardcore produced, you know, that like wasn't the bands, right? Because even though you kind of start as the bands as your, you know, kind of going off point in most of the book, right?
Yes.
And you know, you talk about songs and you talk about records and stuff, but that's just like, that's kind of just like this jumping off point to talk about so much other stuff, culture in general, you know, and cultural stuff in general, right?
Yes, yeah. There is a book by Rebecca Solnit, River of Shadows, which I would really recommend, that uses the technological revolution of the late 19th century, especially in the Bay Area and what turned into Silicon Alley. And there was a certain...
By Silicon Alley, you mean Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley, yeah.
Silicon Valley sounds like maybe like the punk place behind the Google campus where they're going to be doing shows in like
right, yeah.
years.
I divulged something from 20 years from now. And there was a thing there to shoot for where she was making these huge grand connections. Obviously a very differently written book, because this was all, her book was discussing the events that happened long before she was born. And mine is just plugging in my own life experience. I mean, it seemed like it kind of pissed some people off that it wasn't full autobiography, but...
You mean your book pissed people off?
Yeah, I've gotten feedback that that people were annoyed that they had thought it was an autobiography, but it's not. But I mean, if I wrote an autobiography, that would be weird, right? Like, I'm not someone who should be writing an autobiography. I'm just someone who should be sprinkling little bits of their own life experience into a larger narrative or something.
Well, why do you think, you know, you talk, when you're kind of trying to, you do like a laundry list of definitions for punk in the early part of the book or in the intro, right? Where you say, one of the ones that I liked, the last one, or one of the last ones, adult size psychic diapers that can be worn until death.
Yes, I've seen that a lot.
Yeah, I kind of wonder, first of all, you know, if you've ever been tempted to try those diapers on, but also if like talking about this stuff, you know, it's like, there's one thing that's frustrating about like the music world, which is that it seems to like pathologically create more bands and more bands kind of on an exponential scale, you know, and sometimes that seems like a lot of people look at that and think like, is that a good thing? Like, should that be happening? But also another thing it creates is like, not only do the bands form, but like this constant conversation about them, like we're having now, like the books that come out every year, you know, I mean, you know, you talk about some of those things cynically, like the Germs movie and stuff like that. But why do you think that we can't stop talking about it? I mean, that seems like maybe we are wearing the diapers, and we're all wearing the diapers, and we
I'm gonna be struggling with those diapers to get them off for the rest of my life, I think. That was a big problem when I was in Born Against. The main problem with that band was that everyone wanted to talk about it. And so we went on tour for several years, and every night, I would say averaging way more than once a night, somewhere between once and twice a night, we would be interviewed for someone's fanzine, hundreds of fanzines of just people wanting to talk about it. And people really had this need to discuss things that they brought to it that I now know are very subjective. The same way that when you write a book, you will never get the same review twice. Nobody comes to any artistic material cold. We all bring our own subjective stuff to it. So that was a big barrier towards me writing anything about it for decades, was that to me, it had already been discussed to death. There was no reason to keep discussing it. That was something I had to get over a little bit when writing this. I don't know why people want to talk about it, but there's something about it that lends itself to that. And that was very distressing for me in the 90s, seeing that become an equal imperative to not just produce art, but to discuss the art. And that was sort of the kind of the heyday for a very particular type of band festival where there would be bands, but there would also be workshops. And to me, that was just misery, partially because of my background, something that I don't discuss in the book at all, but that I'm slowly coming to terms with, which is that I was raised in a cult when I was a kid. Again, not like, I'm sorry, I say again, but this is like an ongoing, we're just plugging into a conversation that I'm keep having. The cult wasn't like a death cult or anything. It wasn't, people didn't die. It was just a place where a lot of bad shit happened to adults and to kids, including me. And part of what I saw in that world, the 70s groupthink, weird authoritarian hippie commune world, those things seeped into this world in ways that I found really distressing and creepy. So it's taken however many decades for me to sort of get over that, including doing things like this, where I'm discussing something else where I've already analyzed things that I was part of. I feel like you're getting real stoner answers here, and I'm not stoned, but let me know if I just like float off the page too much.
Well, I want to get back to that earlier, a little bit later. I mean, just because you're kind of addressing something that I want to talk about because of how often in the book you mention being burned on community, but you don't really say why.
Right.
But that seems like I kind of want to for a second stick on the fanzine thing before we move on from that, because that struck me as interesting. You know, I'm 34. By the time I was kind of doing music stuff in the early 2000s, like fanzines, I mean, Maximum was still around, you know, these things were still around, but they weren't like quite as central as they once were, you know, and
right.
it's interesting because to like the uninitiated, you know, might be a little confused when they come across the word fanzine in your book, because whenever you talk about them, it's just mostly they talk shit about bands, right? Like they kind of, or like, you know, that seems to be at least the examples you bring up, like MRR, you know, MRR Green Day feuding, or, you know,
right.
whatever, that kind of stuff. And in 2021, like this phenomenon of like antagonism, but not like, it's kind of like satirical or playful antagonism, you know, it's kind of like a foreign thing now a little bit, you know, we've lost that a little bit.
Yeah.
A friend of mine sent me a link to this propaganda show at Gilman in 1995 that I listened to before I read your book. And it's really interesting because like the whole time they're playing, you know, and this is something I think obviously you're very familiar with. It's like they're having this battle with the audience, you know, like people are getting on, it's an audio, so you can't see it, but it's like people are getting up on the mic, they're yelling, you know, there's, you know, it's really fun to listen to, but it's such a foreign vibe that's completely gone away, you know, this sort of dynamic of like not just the band being confrontational, but the audience being confrontational.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
sort of like what comes out of that. So I kind of want you to talk about that, why you think that's disappeared more or less, and whether or not you feel like in the end that was a good thing, or if it was just like one of these, I don't know, bro, it ended up just becoming whatever, youth of today bullshit kind of, still exists as far as like bros, basically bros and their in jokes, you know what I mean?
I don't know why that's an interesting question. I don't know why that stopped happening, and I would be curious to know more about the ways it mutated. In this show that you listened to from '95, what was the gist of the things the audience were yelling? They weren't mad at the band, right? It was people being mad at...
Let's see, one thing I remember in particular, there's a lot of vegan confrontationism, I feel like, where people are kind of heckling them for that. There's,
Wait, because they were vegan, or because the crowd were vegan and they...
No. Propaganda was sort of like was kind of yelling at them, trying to convert them or whatever you want to call it, and the crowd was responding in this way where, I mean, it's hard to tell if they're joking or if they're not joking. There's definitely propaganda is like, calling them, like patriots and nationalists and this kind of stuff. And people are like going, USA, but it's like, it's hard to tell on the audio, which makes it kind of interesting. But you can tell that it's a tense vibe. There's like spitting at one point, there's definitely like calling out probably someone who's moshing inappropriately, this kind of thing. But at the end of the show, it feels like there was probably a success, in this twisted way, is the feeling that I get.
I mean, I guess a success artistically. Conflict is always a lot of fun to watch if you're not involved in it. The band memories that I will cherish the most are seeing people get close to having fistfights with each other on stage, like band members. I just really always would enjoy that a lot. There were more than once, I won't mention any band names, but there was one specific time in Richmond, there was a band where I knew that they were fans of things I had done. And so I thought, I'm going to go stand right up front, like a little bit closer than is appropriate, because I think that might make them nervous and that would be a fun time for me. And then they got into a huge, like a near fist fight on stage. When I'm saying on stage, I'm using that in air quotes because it was just, I was standing on the same level as them. So it was me standing not much farther away than I am now from this camera, like watching these people just lose their shit. And that's entertaining, but I don't know that you can't really manufacture that, which is something I definitely learned. Whatever it was that happened in that propaganda thing, I guarantee I've done the same things, although maybe not from the exact same directions. And I remember a couple times thinking like, this is really sort of, there's something slightly fake about this, either from our side or the audience's side. I don't have any big answers about how that sort of came to be not in fashion, except that look at all the things. Like if you watch, I just saw this 2 nights ago. I was up late at night and YouTube was just showing me random stuff. And it started showing me the Fear set from Decline of Western Civilization, Part 1. And I'd say about a third of their set is just them physically fighting with the audience. It's just people showed up knowing that they wanted to fight the band. And I know that was a thing with Black Flag. Obviously, that was a thing with Gigi Allen. I've known of some other people. Jello Biafra, I was always very interested in, took great pains to not have that phenomenon happen with Dead Kennedys. So they had some really scary things happen to them. I know he got stabbed on stage once, and he kept it very quiet because he didn't want to inspire other people to show up and do things like that. So I think some of this stuff just has an internal gravity that has to play out on its own timeline. And when it's things like people showing up to confront the band, that's just the tradition that they're honoring that goes back like a year or a year and a half. So I'm not surprised that it's completely out of fashion now, but also just the world and the way that we approach art is so utterly different that it just wouldn't make sense, politically. And also just the other big thing is like, we're all living through this horrible time. Everyone's mad about everything. And if you can if you go to a show now and there's a band that is inspiring people to fight, well, that's not that different from being at CBS and seeing people fight over someone not wearing a mask. Like, it's not fun right now. Wasn't there the thing I heard about when, not Life of Brian, but the first Monty Python movie, The Holy Grail, when that came out, or maybe it was Life of Brian, it was one of those. The audience, in all the violent parts in the initial screenings, the audience went dead silent. Like if somebody gets their arm chopped off, you know, or it's just a flesh wound, nobody laughed because it was too close to Vietnam. And people were of the mindset that, like, you cannot laugh about that. And they sort of artistically broke their way through that and said, no, it's actually quite funny when someone gets their arm chopped off. And there's, you know, if it's done silly enough. Did I even come close to answering the question?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing that I would kind of propose, like, you know, I didn't necessarily, you know, I think that's a great point, that like, why recreate that for fun when you know that it's not fun and everywhere else you go, that's kind of happening, you know, which is maybe why sort of the alternative music world has shifted, you know, from like embracing danger to embracing safety, because like,
sure. You know, there was that whole thing when G.W. Bush was president. There was that whole period where everyone was like, where are the great protest punk bands? Where are the anti-Bush songs? And that to me seemed very obvious, which was everybody hated that guy. Like a large portion of the country fucking hated G.W. Bush. And so there wasn't anything novel about showing up to see a band spouting off about G.W. Bush. Like, everybody's doing that, you know. There's nothing. It's not like Reagan times where the country was very clearly aligned with him, and so to say that you didn't like what Reagan was doing had a little bit of oomph to it, because you could get physically challenged for that. Versus if you say you don't like Trump, like the whole country is split, and almost definitely you're going to be preaching to the choir, and that thus raises the hurdle artistically for you to be able to do something really good with that anger.
Yeah, I mean, and I've been thinking about that a lot with in the Youth of Today chapter, right? One of the things that you find kind of the most frustrating, I think, is like what you refer to like the zero tolerance policy for satire, right?
Right.
You know, like this idea of like satire being this, you know, inspiring thing, both for creativity, but also just for music, for whatever, you know. And I think that I remember, yeah, after Trump was elected, a friend of mine was like, oh, you know, kind of like what you said, like, well, at least there'll be some good punk songs written about him or whatever. And the only person I know that's written a song about him is 70 years old. I don't know if you know Eddie and the Subtitles, which is like,
no.
It's an old band actually from Reno that was around in the LA scene in the early 80s. But now he lives here and he still plays music. And he wrote an anti-Trump song, but it makes sense because I feel like he was kind of brought up in the Reagan years playing music, you know? And so for him,
right.
it was kind of like tradition. You can't not do that. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know anybody who's really creating any interesting art, so to speak, you know, in that vein, and sort of like the political punk vein, partially because you can't satirize Trump, really, right? Because like there's this victory where, you know, a person comes to power, not just him, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene or whoever else, where it's actually very difficult to satirize them. And it becomes easier in a way to satirize sort of like reactionary liberals or whoever whoever seems to be like the target. And it makes me wonder about young people, you know, and like about, you know, not
be careful. That's a very slippery slope to go down. It makes me wonder about young people.
I'm sorry about
that. I'm attempting to use this cat to humanize myself, and it's really not working. So, bye.
Well, more that I mean that, like, you know, when you're young and satire or like mocking the adult world, you know, is kind of like where you get a lot of your inspiration, right? You kind of
right.
You feel like these fucking idiots can't figure it out, you know, like we're going to do it better, you know, and you kind of mock them. But, you know, partially, you know, in order to satirize them, like there is a kind of a threshold where like the things you end up satirizing, like they have to be satirizable. For young people I know, there's a lot of, and I'm just speaking for them in a totally non-consensual way. It's almost like, yeah, they're like, yeah, Trump's a fucking moron, but like, what am I going to add to that conversation? Because like, it's so difficult to even add something to that conversation.
Sure.
You know? And so what do you think kind of about this idea of politics being determined in a weird way by like what lends itself to satire and what doesn't, you know, and how like that seems to be like culturally speaking, one of the things that determines like, you know, what do like alternative, arty, you know, transgressive things, you know, like what can they coalesce around? And that might just be whatever's easiest to satirize.
Yeah, it definitely was an eye-opener for me in 2016, seeing that some of the weapon of satire was being used against us. I don't know, the right side, the people who have to be the victors of whatever this thing is. And I fit that into a little footnote, the thing about the woman with the Trump can grab my shirt at the rally. Mm-hmm. That was a really scary, weird moment for me. And I'd written a whole chapter on that thing. It eventually got sort of boiled down to one long footnote. Where I was really trying, I put so much time and effort into trying to figure out how to write about that thing that we're discussing now that doesn't even have a name, where fascists realize that they can take on, not exactly satire, but they can take on some of the trappings of satire and use that as a weapon in a way that's been used against them. That is, my understanding is that has pretty long historical roots. That was a Nazi thing. Trolling was basically something that the Nazis used in the 1920s, just obviously in different mediums. But also what I was trying to convey in this chapter, and what I couldn't convey, is that it's still so amorphous that we can't see the end point from our view. Like, we're in the middle of it. It's still happening. And maybe the first chapter is over, but obviously whatever this thing is, it doesn't totally have a name, is far from over. And so all we can do is kind of pick out little bits in real time. The other thing is writing anything. Aaron Comet Bus really, he gave me a lot of feedback on this book. He really helped shape it. And he was very adamant that I do not mention the word Trump anywhere in the book. We had a pretty big disagreement. I won that disagreement only because it's my book. But I understand his point that everyone is so burned out talking about this person and this phenomenon that it's going to date the book in a way that would just kind of cripple it. And I did take out a lot of topical stuff, partially for that reason. And I think the few things I left in, the word Trump only appears maybe twice in the book. Those were things I felt like I fought for, although not with an editor, with a collaborator, which was sort of a weird dynamic. Was that the question? I'm like a guy on stage somewhere who keeps, you know, everyone's like, yeah, maybe he's doing it. And then I'm like, line. So that's what I'm doing. Was this the question?
I don't think it really matters what the question.
I used to do that. It shows a lot. I would forget what I was talking about. And then I'd look on and I'd go, line. And there'd be this really awful silence because nobody would get the joke, you know?
We get it, man. We get it.
Okay. Yeah.
But okay, I kind of, you know, I have along those lines, I want to just follow that thread a little bit longer, and then we can move on to something less tedious as far as, you know, yeah, it is difficult to talk about Trump, you know, but we can't you can't ignore like the kind of SSD storming the Capitol connection. So here's a question I kind of have about that. If you've ever considered that, like, we're hardcore bears some responsibility, right, for what happens to culture. My question, and I kind of wrote it, so I'm gonna read it a little bit just so I make sure I phrase it right. I wrote, have you ever considered that punks mocking blasphemy and ironic Satanism may actually have registered as earnest up above and down below? I say this because sometimes it feels like hardcore and other alternative cultural movements are kind of horror stories in the style of the monkey's paw, right? You know that story?
Yeah.
where it's like you make a wish and then then it's granted in like its darkest possible form.
Right.
The cover photo of the SSD LP, which for those who haven't read the book, the one that you mentioned is like these men storming the Massachusetts Capitol, right? And you write, where something terrible has happened and now grown men storm the halls of power. That's kind of what comes to mind. I also think about recuperation and the Trump tea and conservative punk and all of this stuff. Is there kind of a creeping fear somewhere in the back of your mind that when you, for example, emceed for an ironic pro-war hardcore band, that you were actually kind of summoning that into existence in a weird, dark way?
Yeah, maybe not in a way that I've thought about. The ironic pro-war hardcore band was trying to do what Stephen Colbert did. His show came on the air like 6 months after, and I remember all of us were pissed. Like, that's what we were doing, even though I'm saying we, but I was like their mascot for half of one tour. I think that's a real question. And that's probably what I was sort of stumbling towards in this chapter that I tried to write. But again, it's just, we're not going to be able to see it from our vantage point. It's like, it feels like people essentially talking about 9/11 before 9/11, you know, in all the, I remember there being, I don't know, on Twitter in the general political discourse or wherever, people sort of tiptoeing around the reality that there are terrorists that want to only kill people, that don't have demands. Because that was a really big mental shift at the time. I remember on 9/11 being really surprised, like, oh, that's changed. We're not going to be looking at hijackings anymore where people are going to Cuba. They're just going to use the plane as a weapon. And I wasn't surprised by that the same way I wasn't exactly surprised by Trump. I mean, I was shocked, or COVID, or any of these things. Like, okay, that makes sense. I don't know, I'm losing it. But yes is the answer to the question.
Well, I mean, almost specifically like in the way that whenever it's kind of like what underground cultures do, you know, is they kind of create these I mean, I'm using the word weapon here generally, but they create these incredibly powerful things, but oftentimes they lose control of them. Or, you know, like even something totally different, like Whole Foods as recuperating the community food co-op model, right? Like this thing that, you know, was intentionally sort of small scale and
Right.
really awesome. And now it's like this monster, you know, that I feel like even quote unquote normal people kind of resent, because it sort of just takes over and you're sort of cornered into spending more money than you want on groceries, you know, in this weird way. Same thing with hardcore music and certain things that it pioneers, such as, you know, confrontationalism and satire and all of this kind of stuff. Like when you see the Proud Boys or whoever doing it, like you're saying, you kind of have this weird thing where you're like,
right.
And the creepy thing about that is like the Gavin McInnes sort of bridged the worlds. And there are the people that are able to bridge those worlds. And today, do you feel like you wrote this book and somebody might use it as a manual for something, you know, for something darker and more devious in the future? Because it is a guide in a way to sort of like certain.
Is it? I don't see it that way. Is there anything in there that anyone would want to emulate out of what I've written?
I mean, I'm not sure if it's about direct emulation, but more kind of like, you know, you sort of understand how things work, what things become popular culturally, maybe, you know, and what ends you use that for, right? I mean, that's kind of up to you, you know, like if you want to sort of mobilize people to, you know, protest something, what they're protesting, right? That depends on the situation. Like they might be protesting the stealing of the election, for example, right? But making their own, you know.
Yeah, every 4 years when you see all this propaganda about voting, pro-voting propaganda, I mean, especially last year, seemed like it really should have been tailored a bit more, like don't vote wrong, not just vote, but vote the right way. I really didn't understand. I never understand that when I see these, I don't know, on any level, if it's a commercial on TV or a flyer, someone's handing a button, like go vote. Like that doesn't really do it for me, because voting's not necessarily good if you don't vote for the right person.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's change gears from that. Are you ready?
Okay. Yep.
So another thing, just about like something else that the Aaron Comic Bus conversation, honestly, for me, I really like that part of the book, partially because it's like kind of the only time in the book where you let someone else's voice in completely, right? It's not sort of mediated through Sam. It's just like this other person talking,
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to be that. It turned into that, which is good. That's great. But
Yeah.
it turned into something very different from what I had thought it was going to be.
But I think that's awesome because, at least my take is that Aaron's point of view on sort of the culture of underground stuff is pretty different from yours, right? And I'm wondering if you included that as sort of like a shortcut, right? For Aaron's particular style of maybe optimism or positive thinking, right? To enter your book in a way where you maybe didn't have to be responsible for it directly, because it's kind of like coming out of his mouth. Rather than your own. So why did you choose to kind of put him in there in that way? Was it sort of a way to get his ideas across because you really agree with them, or because you wanted to sort of have that back and forth,
Originally, that chapter was modeled after this book that's right here, which when you all see this, you're seeing this backwards, right? Just like I am?
No, we see it forwards.
Oh, okay. It's just conversations between Michael Ondaatje, the writer of The English Patient, which I'm sure some of you have seen in theaters, and Walter Murch, who is a movie editor. I think he's still alive. He did Godfather, Apocalypse Now, English Patient. And it's just two people who know a lot about film talking about film. And I think I had a tad arrogantly thought that it would be me and Aaron, like a bit more like with the pipes and in the big leather recliners, just sort of amiably discussing nuances of the subculture. And what it turned into was two people who came from very different worldviews, trying to sort of make those worldviews connect. I'm glad it turned into that. And a lot of people have told me they really liked that piece. My feeling when it went into the book was, I don't know how this is going to read or how it's going to land. I'm just going to put it in there. And at the very least, I'll probably get points for doing something weird and unique. But it turned into something very different, a little more confrontational than I had expected, and a little bit less of the tone that my in-person conversations have with him. But I'm sure this is an experience we've all had, right? Like where you have someone where you have these incredible conversations and you try and bottle it somehow in some artistic format. It never works the way you want it to work. People kind of, they tense up a little bit. I do a lot of interviews with people just because I can. I mean, it started with my parents, and then I thought, well, hell, it's free. Like I have this device that will let me record an unlimited amount of stuff, and I can throw it on my 1 terabyte hard drive and never think about it again. So why not just interview friends of mine or people I don't even know that well? And that's definitely the thing that I found, is that people's responses change. Just the act of it being recorded really seriously changes it. Again, did I even get close?
Well,
answer that you wanted?
One of the things that, that the tension is and because you mentioned this earlier, so I want to come back to it before we start to open it up to questions. The tension, and I feel it, is maybe Aaron's faith in community. In particular, I like how he talks about.
Totally.
I mean, presumably you read his book Postmortem.
Funny thing about that, he gave it to me on tour and I lost it. And so then we just talked maybe a week ago. And I said, hey, could I maybe get a copy of that Postmortem? And he was like, I gave you one. And I said, I don't think so. So he resent it. I had it like 2 days later. It was really weird. And then, of course, a day after that, I found the copy he gave me. So no, I was secretly a little bit like, God, I hope I didn't make Aaron mad. He never gave me his, because that was sort of like almost when we were doing this, we were doing both those projects at the same time. And we had both treated those things as if they were sort of companion pieces. but I have not yet read it because I literally just realized that I had it in my possession a couple days ago.
Yeah, well,
But
it is a great companion, and it's a good companion to your conversation, without
yeah,
getting into
well, no spoilers because I haven't read it.
no spoilers, but he does, the idea is he kind of takes a postmortem of things that work, things that didn't, right? And
Yeah,
there is he has some faith in community, and in the conversation that you have with him kind of comes up with this tension, that's one of, you mentioned multiple times in that conversation, sort of being burned on community. And
yeah,
he talks about making institutions last and kind of how they have to, in your interview, but also in the book, kind of adjust to meet the needs of the people that use them, so maybe like, community centers, old folks' homes, whatever it is that the old punks that started them need today. And in your mind, part of the being burned on community, now that I kind of understand what you mentioned earlier, I feel like, yeah, there's a fear, right, of going all in to like the utopian projects, right? And how like inevitably, especially in the hardcore world of the 90s, a lot of people were going all in to that, and
yeah.
is that something that you feel like, is that kind of why, I mean, you went to Fort Thunder, but you weren't involved deeply with it, right? You've been to Gilman, like, is that kind of what kept you from being involved in these places? Because you can kind of be a band, you can satirize things, you can have politics, but once you commit to like working at a underground space, right, you kind of have to buy into some of those things a little bit more than you can when you're just a band playing there, right?
Well, yeah, I never would have been in a position to volunteer at, say, Gilman Street, just because I was always a visitor. And after the first couple visits, I started to have some status in that world, and people treated me a little different, which I think I took advantage of. I talk about going to an epicenter meeting. I remember there were a lot of things where I just wanted to kind of like audit what they were doing as if it was a class I'm not going to pay for. And I did that a lot, but I'm sure subconsciously, yeah, I was like, there is a cutoff for all this stuff. I did get heavily involved in ABC No Rio, although not, I mean, again, it was mostly as just someone who went. I don't think my memories are so weird from that time. I don't think I did that much volunteering on any level with them, but I'd already had these memories of previous subculture problems from the 1970s. And so I had this weird vantage point of being able to see all these really creepy phenomenons repeat themselves over and over again.
Can you mention anything a little more specifically than that? I'm kind of wondering, like.
Yeah, sure. Let me grab another one of these. I'll be right back.
Okay. So for our listeners here, we're scheduled to go till 7:30. We can obviously run a little bit late. And anyone who wants to get a question together, get into the discussion here, I think we're kind of at around, probably a good time for that. So your options are drop your question in the chat, which we would love. I think you can raise your hand in Zoom. I mean, don't do it physically just because there's a lot of people in here who want to see it, but you can, like, a little yellow hand will pop up.
I really enjoy talking, but also looking. I feel like I'm casing everyone's house right now. You all have very interesting houses. Okay, wait. So what were we doing here?
I want to hear, give me something more specific, right? You talk about being burned on shit from the 70s.
Sure. My background is that I went to every type of school that's possible, including 2 hippie schools. There was a hippie school in Albany, New York, where I grew up. I was part of that for 5 years. That school was functionally run like a cult, and I saw some pretty gnarly shit there. Later, after I'd gone to a couple different public schools and then did a year in military school, I went to a hippie school in Vermont, which was a boarding school. But I mean, that phrase boarding school usually conjures up something out of something slightly posh. And this was very much not posh. This was a school by and for really grubby hippies. We took a trip when I was in 9th grade, where a van load of us and the principal of the school and one other teacher were the 2 chaperones. And we drove from Vermont down to Florida. And the way that they would arrange like at night we would stop at maybe a motel somewhere. The principal would go in and talk to the owner of the motel, come out and say, okay, I've explained the situation to him, which first of all, what? But I've explained the situation to him that we're driving down to Florida. And he said, we can clean out the gutters and have there are 2 rooms to stay in for the night. And then when we got down to Florida, he made a bunch of phone calls and he had arranged for us to get free tickets to the Bahamas. So we flew on this little economy jet to the Bahamas and then cleaned up the grounds of this hotel in exchange for floor space in like the back of their kitchen or something. So the first time I went on tour, I was like, oh, I've already done this. I know this. Like, this is familiar to me. And so the things that I would see on tour that were community-wise, that were problematic, like, for example, punk houses. Like, I had already functionally lived in a punk house, and I knew a lot of the weird foibles that would go on, like, and this happened more than once, people waking everyone in the house up at 3 a.m. for a house meeting. That, to me, was something I'd already experienced, because the hippie school in Albany that I went to would have literally all-day meetings, 8 or 9 hour meetings. And this is with kids. Like, that has more of an impression on you when you're a child. At least if you're an adult, you've developed some skills to get you through a 9 hour meeting. Those were all things that I'd seen before. And so the stuff, the things where people just kind of fritzed out and made scenes or speechifying, all those things I had already seen or participated in, and it's kind of like I could see what was coming around the corner. I had, partially because I was 14, but I had a couple meltdowns in the school in Vermont where I was just standing on a chair screaming at people. And I remember being in a band like, oh, right, this is that. Like, I've already done this. This is me standing in front of more people screaming at them, except now they've paid money for me to do it and I have a microphone.
It's interesting, Sam, because it reminds me a lot of, my family's from the Soviet Union, and it reminds me of kind of their trauma about anything, like even remotely leftist in politics, and how it comes from this thing of like,
yeah,
we don't believe in Obama because he's promising us hope. And we know what happens when people promise us hope, and
no shit, right.
It's very generalized to stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like, and it makes sense, because it's hard to forget trauma, and you can't, just if someone else tells you that you don't get it, you never really shake that, right? Or maybe if someone else says, this is different, Sam, this is different, we really mean it,
Right. Yeah. It was also weird for me that I was in no way able to articulate any of that, so that when I had people repeating these same behavioral things towards me, treating me in certain ways, it makes you feel like you're being gaslighted all the time by everyone. That's kind of where I'm at. I just, despite having a lot of therapy and continuing therapy and starting group therapy tomorrow, which I'm really not looking forward to.
No, you're starting group therapy right now, Sam.
Oh shit, this is it. Several times I said to them, this is not going to be like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, right? And they're like, oh, no, but like, that's what you say when it is.
Well, congratulations on that.
Yeah, thanks.
For real.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have we have a bunch of questions in the chat here, so I'm going to try to move out of the way and let some people pick your brain a little bit. So Dan Morse, who read the book, I know that. I'm curious to talk about the book as itself hardcore in its honesty, directness, the way it's kind of composed of various essays, kind of like an album, right? And you kind of kept most of the chapters relatively short. He's curious how much of this was intentional, right? So is this kind of your style, or did you is this just the way your brain works, or was that something intentional?
You mean the layout of the book?
Yeah, kind of like almost, yeah, it's album-esque in the sense that, the songs relate to each other, or rather the chapters relate to each other, right? But there's not like chapter 1, 2, 3, That's
really interesting. I never felt that I had much input on the formation of an album. Every band I've been in, I was I strongly felt like I was the person who was sort of watching it happen because I'm not a musician. So much of it is just me sitting in a chair, letting other people do things because I don't know how to mix or play an instrument or anything else. So maybe subconsciously, I think for me, it was way more just about being influenced by fanzine culture. If that's a thing, that's a weird phrase, but I wrote in the book that Toby Vale's fanzine Jigsaw really influenced me. She had done this thing where she would just select a band and then just write 2 pages, kind of freeform about the band. That was actually where I learned that I first met her, by bursting into a bathroom with a megaphone and yelling at her and Kathy, the bass player for Bikini Kill, which, I mean, I guess I did. I don't remember. But it kind of took, like, that information would have been really weird to read in some other format, but it was kind of, it made sense and was borderline endearing reading it in her little essay about Born Against. So that was more the influence for how this book arrived at structurally, but most of it was just finding a way to put everything together, that there's sort of a through line, which sometimes just emerged on its own. Like the band chapters are all just arranged alphabetically. It's a coincidence that really worked. That Youth of Today is at the end and Casual Dots at the beginning, and that allowed me to say some of the things about feminism I need to say, and then the SSD thing is in there, but it just happened to be that alphabetically SSD and 7 seconds come before Youth of Today, which was a nice setup for Youth of Today, and then those chapters were a nice setup for the Born Against thing. Some of those choices that are made are just writing choices, which seem to me a little sculptural. It's like you're just chiseling away a big block of stone to let this thing emerge. Mm-hmm. That's pretty universal, I would think. Anyone who does art has that feeling, right? That you're it's the Roy Neary thing from Close Encounters, where you receive the signal and you have to be obedient to the signal. And it could just be building a mashed potato mountain, or it could be writing a book or doing a fanzine, but you see it and you just try and cobble it together and have it fit with this vision of that exists in the back of your mind. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And so Troy, I see your hand is up. I'll call on you next. Jason Cron asks, just on the kind of heels of that question, I want to know about your writing routines. Do you have certain time quantities or word counts that you aim for each day, each week? And then what about reading quotas? Do you kind of try to keep a reading schedule more or less?
Yes. The answer is to both of those. Right now I'm finishing up a novel, and so there's 2 quotas per day I need to hit, both of which I've not been hitting. One is a word quota. That's not too hard to do because for me, a lot of times the hardest thing is figuring out what it is I'm writing about. So once I have, like, I need 2 chapters on what it's like to destroy a washing machine in Rage. And so then I just write down notes, sometimes I'll just sit there and dictate things into my phone, and then I'll arrange them the next day. The other quota is harder to do, and that's just where I need to be in the manuscript. And I use spreadsheets for all of that because I really like having very precise data on where I'm at. So every day it's these 2 things. It's the word count and then the percentage of total manuscript done count. Because those things are based off of daily averages, you're getting way more information, I'm sure, than anybody here wanted, and I'm really sorry.
This isn't proprietary?
My systems are so ridiculous that nobody, I did a week of guest editing at KPCC, the local, one of the 2 main NPR stations in Los Angeles. And on my first day there, this small crowd of people had gathered behind my computer because it's open seating, open floor plan. Mm. And they're all saying, "What the hell are you doing?" And all my stuff is color coded. And I didn't realize until that moment that it looks like something a crazy person would do. It doesn't look like a manuscript. So yeah, good luck trying to use any of this information for any of your own writing. but those are things, the point of that was that if I miss a word count or I miss a percentage count, then it's based off an average over a long spread of time. And it means the next day I just have to do maybe 10 extra words, or I'm several percentage points behind. So it's something I'm always trying to hit. I don't have any times really, except that I don't write after midnight, meaning I could be really deep into something, and if the clock hits midnight, I just automatically will stop, because that's just a losing game trying to pull an all-nighter.
Too fuzzy.
I
Too
can't
fuzzy.
do that. Yeah, it's not healthy. And I've gotten in some really, really bad situations in terms of mental and physical health with writing in the past that make me conscious of that. As far as reading, I try and read 50 pages a day of whatever it is I'm reading. Doesn't often work. I've had periods where I've read nothing because I just wanted to work on my writing and exclude everything else. And it's a nasty feeling. I would assume some of you have, or all of you have had that with maybe not writing, but other things, just artistic things where you decide to push yourself and make yourself go as hard as you can. And the moral for me was always like, maybe I can, but it's not healthy for me and it doesn't leave me feeling good, and it's probably not good for the project. So it's always good to have those cutoffs, and it's always good to use my physical body in some way every day, and also read 50 pages of whatever it is I'm reading every day. I'm only seeing half of everyone's comments here. Oh, there they are. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'll look through them, Sam. Don't
okay. Right.
Yeah, don't worry. Okay, Troy, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, sure. Sam, I interviewed you like a decade ago on KSPC.
Oh yeah, of course. Hey, what's up?
How you doing?
Good. I don't see your face
I
right
felt
now.
like much of the book, I feel like were a lot of things that we touched upon a little bit in that interview, but in a way that I think like a lot of my questions after hearing how you articulated many things or reading many of the things that you articulated in the book, right? It made my questions feel very invasive in many ways for a good reason, right? Because I remember most of what I was asking you very much had to do with questions about, you know, born against, this sort of very specific time in your life, right? And now, you know, looking at the way in which you frame the book, one of the main theses that really stuck out to me was that you say something about, you know, kind of an artist having the right to regret certain contributions that they made.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, what I was asking you, and this was at a time when you were doing even like poetry, you were moving into creative fiction.
I was doing some spoken shows, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, and on the radio show too, you performed like Big Baby Man. I remember a lot of the names.
Oh yeah. That's Big Baby Man is a short story I wrote. It's not a routine I do. So everyone calm down. I wasn't in a diaper.
Well, no, I mean it made me think a lot, right? Because, you know, a lot of the things that you say about feeling like, you know, you had belonged to a cult at one point, right? And in some ways, you know, hardcore is kind of like this cult thing, right? And even like the types of questions that I was asking of you that were very much sort of just situating you at one point in your life, right? And expecting you to kind of just remember these things. They didn't really sort of allow for the type of dynamism, right, in your creative output that was actually ongoing and continuing even in the moment in which we were speaking, right, and continuing even into the now. And I feel like much of the sort of questions that get asked of you are often very much just sort of situating you in this moment. And in some ways, I think that the book was, it was kind of like answering some of those things, but also kind of trying to move out of them and kind of leave them behind in some sort of way. That's the way that I kind of read it.
It was mostly, so I remember that interview pretty vividly, that was one of the first times in like a decade I talked about any of that stuff. And part of that, beyond just, you know, a nice thing to do, and also support KSBC, everyone here should do that. But I remember coming away from that thinking like, okay, I have a very specific problem here, which is the chronology problem. And I need to figure out how to get around that, because that's going to be a really serious thing in my life, which is that the me from the early 90s is still representing the me of now, whenever now is. And I hadn't gotten my mind around that for the interview. So I'm sure that might have been a little awkward for you. Was it? That was kind of an awkward interview. It wasn't a bad interview, but I remember it was kind of awkward.
I was very young. I mean, this was over a decade ago. I think I was about,
Yeah, you were like,
I was 20 years old.
back then.
And then I remember too, I mean, you were saying even like, you know, I was asking you things about, you know, what you did at the time or whatever. And you were just like, you know what, like, I can't even really remember why I did that. I can't really explain it. I'm not like, I don't even know what mindset that I was in. And like, I don't even relate to that person. And in many ways I can, you know, I strongly relate to that sentiment myself. You know, I'm quite younger than you are, right? And you were, I was asking you to kind of, you know, reflect on stuff that happened about 20 years ago, right? And things that happened to me 5 years ago. I'm pretty different person from that even right now as you get older, right? And so I relate a lot to what you were saying.
Yeah, that's a hard concept to convey to anyone who's not of the age where they can hear it. And I remember not understanding that concept, that it was more like you're you and you are this continuous you, and therefore you need to be able to defend anything that you've said in your life because it's part of your permanent record. Some of this has migrated. I mean, some of this is pretty mainstream, like internet thinking, you know, that you can tweet something 6 years ago and you should be accountable for it. And I mean, I guess you should, but there's always more layers of nuance in there. Here's the other question I had about that interview. I remember you being really weirded out because I did not have nice things to say about the refused. And that seemed like a really weird concept for you. Am I misremembering that?
Sorry, I have to unmute
Yeah,
him.
I got you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, you remember that exactly well.
Yeah. And so that was another little thing the interview told me, like, okay, there's like a conceptual hurdle here that I need to bridge, because this is also a thing in my life, as I have people who say they were influenced by things I've done who, like, that's not good. You know, I don't think that, yeah, the point I was trying to make there is like, I didn't feel obliged to be on someone's side just because they took something good from something that I've done. And I get that that's a weird concept. I would imagine it'd be a less weird concept for you personally now because you're older, and maybe it's a less weird concept just because of what we've all been through in the last 6 years, 5 years, seeing Trump people take these little bits and pieces from things that are our fucking things and reusing them in really nefarious ways.
So Sam, we got a lot of questions. I want to try to get through.
Sure.
Yeah, I want to get through some shit. There's a lot of questions about, you know, about 26 and about the Crucifix chapter. So I'm going to try to, you know, some of them involve Jake asks, thinking about your chapter on 26, did you relate to him and kind of his path as a possible, I mean, this is the obvious question, as a possible way that your life might have ended if you had not pulled away at the time that you did? Some people,
absolutely.
Yeah, we just have some people who are just fascinated with all questions 26 in particular. As John says, as a punk kid that grew up in Michigan, he was very excited to see that. He's curious about how that chapter came about and kind of similar stuff. If there was, you know, some of that tension maybe of like looking at this and trying to understand if this was a role model or a cautionary tale.
There's definitely some cautionary tale stuff in that, and I completely saw that with him. But the reason that I did that piece was I didn't really figure that out until I was in the middle of it. Originally, I had known for several years about the 9/11 stuff. And for a long time, I had this feeling like somebody needs to do that. And I felt like it took years of me just having that thought and tumbling it through my head before I was like, oh, I could do that. That's a possibility. And of course, then the fear instantly is that someone's going to swoop in and get the story. But I contacted him through Alternative Tentacles, and I already had interviewed him once for my fanzine 15 years earlier. And there was this weird moment where I thought, okay, this could be something really good. I just need to go ahead and do this. So I just got a cheap Southwest ticket and rented a car and stayed in a motel for I think 5 or 6 days. And then every day I would just wake up and drive to his house. It's like a half hour away. And he was very open to discuss. I remember the first day he said, all right, I guess you want to talk about that band. And I said, no, that's Wednesday. This is Monday. We're just talking about your childhood. And he was sort of taken aback by that someone would have that much interest in other parts of his life. And maybe halfway through, I realized I had something really good here potentially. And then when he gave me all those documents, and it was like a stack of documents of things that the police and the FBI had collected on him. I mean, I could have written a decent piece just based off that documentation. So then my worry switched while I was doing the piece that something's going to happen and he's going to change his mind. There were a couple times when we were having these long marathon Q&A sessions in his living room where he would get a little cranky's not the right word, but just a little distrustful. And so when it ended, we had this really strange moment in front of his house when it was all over and I was just heading out and I was going to fly out in the morning. I said, look, I promise I'm going to do the most empathetic job I can with this piece, but you should know you're not going to be happy with this because that's not how this works. And he was like, oh yeah, I know that. Also, you should know I'm never going to read it. And I was like, okay, cool, great. And then that was it. And we stayed in touch for a while. I haven't talked to him in years. Many people contact me mostly through Instagram saying what is up with him now. So I'm going to write him. I'm looking at the birthday card I'm supposed to send him, but his birthday was yesterday. I missed it. So I'm hoping that I can send him a belated birthday card and find out what the hell he's up to. And also, has he stayed true to his thing? Does he really not know what's going on in the world? Like, how incredible would that be? But also, how does that work during a quarantine? Like, do you just notice one day that everyone's wearing a mask when you go out to get groceries, So hopefully I'll have an answer for everyone soon on that, but I don't now. I look back on that whole thing as just being, I was very clear after it came out and I got this really good reception to it that I was never going to have that experience again. And that has totally panned out. I will never have that good a writing experience where something is just completely handed to me. Like that. That was just a one-time weird thing. Also, last thing on that, the piece that's in the book is the 8,000 word edit. I have an 11,000 word edit that just didn't add anything to it. It was like an extra page on the raccoons. I talked to Ian MacKay a little bit about a show that Minor Threat had played in DC and how angry everyone was at the Crucifix because they antagonized the cops. Because if you notice, there's no anti-cop Minor Threat songs. Like, those people had a very different, DC scene had a very different conception of police. And I think they really weren't ready for someone like Doc Dart coming in and being that antagonistic from the stage towards police officers. It was kind of interesting, but it didn't really add anything. But if any of you are interested in reading that longer thing, maybe I should put that on Medium or something. Is that an option? Do people do that, right?
I'm sure people would love to read that. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to write that down right now.
Okay, good. Okay, we're gonna change gears a little bit. I really want to get to people's questions. So I'm gonna have a couple questions here that are more about the physical process here. Austin asks, you've mentioned a lot of times this conversation about how you don't remember anything and you don't know what you were thinking, but you clearly do have.
Yeah, I remember some stuff. That's a little bit of a cop out. I realize now.
But you clearly also have like an archive of stuff, right? And so talk about that a little bit. Both, if you collected, stuff just from one year, 2004, probably you could have like a closet full of shit. So what's your archival process for keeping? How can you tell what's going to be important and what's not? And then a similar question: if today you had a Xerox 6500 and limitless supplies today, what would you do with that? So as far as like what, in 2021, physical stuff, what's your relationship to sort of creating those things that for a long time were kind of automatically done? And now I think people have a little bit of a different relationship to that,
I archive everything digitally because I lost something really important to me maybe 10 years ago. And I just wanted to make sure that never happened again. So I got a neat scan. I don't know if that's a thing that people know. It's just a scanner that does optical character recognition. Most people use it for receipts. And so I realized I had these letters. And so I started digitizing my old letters. And then it was just everything, all my old fanzines, letters I'd written to people, interviews I've done with people, any press I've gotten in the last 50 years. I just wanted one place where I could find everything. And I think I've been pretty good at not maintaining too many hobbies. I don't have that many hobbies besides just reading, but it's kind of turned into a hobby, just tracking things down and throwing them into the archive. I don't keep much physical stuff, although I do have a bunch of bankers boxes just filled with things. I mean, I don't feel like much of a pack rat because in the 90s, I went through a long period where I would just destroy things. I'd get really mad and just whatever was closest, I would just destroy.
Austin is curious, Sam, what did you lose? Or is that private information?
I lost a radio drama. Men's Recovery Project did an old-timey radio drama, you know, like the Green Hornet or something. I wouldn't say it was good, but it was interesting, and it was more than good enough to be on an MRP record. And we put a lot of time into it, wasted a lot of people's times too, with just getting them to play parts. And then, oh well.
You mean, was it just on was it on a cassette or something?
No, it was a data file in some format that I'm sure is long obsolete. And just one day I realized no one had it, and that was that. But also I don't like looking for stuff. It gets me really frustrated. So it's very convenient now. Like if I need anything, my passport number or information from a letter someone wrote me in 1989, you know, literally anything in my life, I can get to it within about 5 clicks. And what I found is that I really like that. And I can't destroy things if they're digitally, because I have little copies stashed here and there. So even if I wanted to get rid of something, I couldn't. Oh, the Xerox 6500. Yeah, I tried to find one of those for a while. Those things are like the size of a small car. They're just beautiful machines. I can't imagine there's one on the planet that works anymore. But if I had one, yeah, I would do just fucking the world's best fanzine. That's still a thing. I'd say once a week, I had this feeling like, God, I need to do a really good fanzine. And then there's this other twin thought to it, like, well, just do it, jerk. No one cares. You're not being held back. No one in the world is restraining you from doing the master fanzine that you have in your head. But yeah, if I had access to one of those machines, I would really make use of it.
So can you give us a glimpse of some of the columns in that zine?
Oh, what it would be about? I have no idea, but the amount, I could do a fanzine on the amount of times I have discussed doing fanzines with friends or things. I mean, there's, of all the fanzines I put out, there have to be more that I didn't put out, and a bunch that I got really far into making before realizing that they were not doable or terrible ideas. I had a period in '98 where I was set. I was going to do a fanzine a month, and I had all these different titles. And at a certain point, you realize, like, well, you're not making any money off this, and seemingly not many people care. So maybe don't do that. And then also the stuff I want to write, I can just put into books, and that seems to be a more productive use of my time.
So I would say, this book it's kind of different from some other typical, what you kind of deride as congratulatory, self-congratulatory, nostalgia, et cetera, kind of stuff. And we have a question kind of about that. Going into the project, did you have other authors or books as a reference point, right, for doing this type of, Toby, I think, calls it an anti-memoir, or like this type of book of kind of recollection where you are a character in the book, but you're avoiding a very particular thing, nostalgia, self-congratulation and stuff. Are there some other books like that you're inspired by?
Yeah, there are 2 books that are literally right here in front of me. This one, which is like, this is Lester Bang's Psychotic Reactions, is it's a springboard to a lot of hackneyed writing. But in that book, there is an essay called The White Noise Supremacists, where he really dismantles the extremely casual racism of that first and second wave CBGB scene and all the little tributaries, the no wave scene and other scenes in New York City. And it comes pretty late in the book. So it's this whole book of really good, but very ridiculous rock writing and writing that's influenced so much bad writing that I think it would be very difficult for a modern reader to really get into it. And then kind of buried in it is this incredible revelatory chapter where he really takes himself to task and everyone else in the scene around him. I know he got a lot of shit for writing that piece. People were really unhappy. This one is different, but Blues People by Leroy Jones is just a history of blues music. But to him, he's almost using the word a little bit the way I'm using hardcore. I mean, he discusses a lot of jazz and he really digs into I don't want to say sociological because that's such an awful word, but everything around the music and what it meant to have this structure of white supremacy influencing people and just providing this wellspring of frustration, this itch that couldn't be scratched. Like if you're a musician in the 1920s and you're not white, you know, your options are limited. He did a really good job of connecting all these dots. And then the other one is over here. This is the David Byrne book. I don't know that I would recommend it. It's really dense, but he did some of the same things that I did in Mutations, where he kind of deconstructs things that he had done and provides the rationale. And what you realize maybe halfway through it is that a lot of the things that seemed very needlessly arty with David Byrne's career had specific functional starting off points. I'm not going to remember any examples of that, but you know, it's like when Van Halen had that whole thing with the green M&Ms, you know, where they would, the rumor was they would trash the backstage if the green M&Ms hadn't been picked out of the bowl of M&Ms. And everyone, I'd heard that as a kid and I always thought that was funny. And then I read this great interview with him in a not good magazine, Seconds, the old magazine that was run by the guy who did American Hardcore. Not a good magazine, but in this interview with David Lee Roth, he said, well, the reason that we did that is because Van Halen were putting on the world's largest live show. We had all these technical requirements that could literally have gotten us killed if they weren't followed. It's almost like the middle of our contract was just schematics. And so in the middle of these schematics, we would put this little tiny block of text that says the green M&Ms have to be pulled out, or we reserve the right to trash the dressing room. And so that let them know they didn't have to do anything except they walk into a venue, go into the back. If the green M&Ms are out, like, oh, everything's going to be good for our show. That's kind of what the David Byrne book set up. And I guess in a way that was a little bit of a goal with me. That was one of the side goals of Mutations, was to really spell out like, hey, I know that I've done all these things that look really random. Some of them weren't. Here's why I did them, blah, blah, blah.
Can you just really quick, what were the titles of the first two books again, just for everybody?
The first one is by Lester Bangs. It's called Psychotic Reactions and Carburetor Dung. And I'm really only recommending the one chapter in it, The White Noise Supremacists, I think. The other book is called Blues People. It's by Leroy, Leroi Jones. And then the other book is How Music Works by David Byrne. Again, not totally recommending that.
Okay, Sam, well, let's, we're getting close to 8, so we're gonna wrap up with kind of a final question here. Really do appreciate, your time. And I love this book. So if anyone here, I have actually kind of this week I read it again. So I read it twice now. So I highly recommend it, to anyone here.
Thanks.
And there's at least one person on this call who I think has read the Kindle version. So you can get an ebook as well. So this question is, I'm just trying to bring it to 2021, coming out of COVID, right? We've never had this opportunity to like reset kind of in the way that we have. And it's kind of interesting because out of everything in the whole world, bands and music have experienced the hardest stop in a way, right? Like most things are still moving even at a snail's pace, but I feel like a lot of performance and stuff is like, it just isn't happening in a lot of places.
Right.
I'm not going to say globally, I guess, but in the United States and in most places here, even though I do hear from weirdo old guys talking about underground shows and shit, but that's a different story. So you do talk about in the book something that I think we've all experienced, which is looking out at a crowd and sort of seeing an aggressive band play and seeing just like blank faces, disinterest, right? Nothing going on. The reason I was like asking about the fanzine earlier too, and you know, I think from your career, sorry if I'm calling it a career, from your musical exploits over the years, right? What I feel that you did by confronting people, right, is like forcing the audience to react, maybe out of a desire for them to like go out there and create something. For example, if you hate my fucking band, write a fanzine about it, and like more of something will come into the world, right? So the point is, you know, you go to a show, the band is, like Aaron says, right, it's the end result, but not necessarily the point. The point might be for the show and the band to sort of be the spark that does whatever else it does, you know, and
Right.
That's not up to you. That's kind of up to the audience, but the audience has to react in some way, which is why over the years, I kind of see some of your stuff trying out different techniques, you know, as one thing gets hackneyed, you kind of move into something else, right? What do you think? You know, we're all sitting down here, you know, this is probably some of the greatest minds of our generation on this call, right? We could put our heads together, and as people start playing shows again, right? I think what we want, what everybody wants, right? You go to a show and you're excited and you're high a little bit. I mean, figuratively, right? You go home, you create something of your own, you know, you start your own band, you start your own zine or whatever, but, you know, that can't be built in, you know? So what are your words of like encouragement as we kind of get back to like booking shows and doing stuff, you know, how, if you had the levers of power, right? How would you kind of get people to sort of start back up again, better than when we stopped?
I don't have an answer for that. Let me answer that question by talking about something that isn't totally linked to it, but I'm going to pretend is. I had a revelation a week ago that the nature of bands is going to change very soon. I think it's going to be about a decade that a band will come to mean something utterly alien to us, and that is that there will be the possibility of having, I don't want to say a virtual band. First of all, the word virtual is awful, so we're just using it as a placeholder, but it'll be possible to have a band that can perform where the entire act is closer to recording than live performance. So for example, I could be in a band with people who are on different continents, and in maybe 10 years or so, we could perform in what is functionally a live space, but it's not. It's all fake. We're all somewhere else. And the thing that excited me is that you won't have to be yourself. You could be someone else. And also you don't even have to play your instrument. And I got really excited because I realized like I could play drums in a band in the future without having to learn drums. At most, it would be the equivalent of learning how to program a drum machine, but it will appear as if I'm playing drums. And I don't know, that seemed really exciting to me. I don't know, I have nothing to say about what's going to happen when things open up again, except what seems obvious to me, which is that this is like, I think we're getting a little reprieve here, but I don't think there's going to be ever returning to normal in the way that we're all hoping it will be. I mean, we all know we've left the age of there being once in a century pandemics like this. And when the permafrost really gets going, there's going to be more and worse pandemics. And this whole way of life that we have, an indoor way of life, that's going to be permanent. And that's really going to be permanent once the larger effects of climate change kick in. We are going to be an indoor species for a while. Do you all know geoengineering? This term, is that familiar? Do people talk about geoengineering a lot?
Go ahead and explain it.
I know the time's tight and everyone's already wants to get off. Geoengineering, there are different definitions of it, but I read one book on it here called How to Cool the Planet, but I've read references to it in other books. It's the idea that there have been two volcano explosions in human history. There was one in the Philippines in the 1990s, and there was one in a series of volcanic explosions in Iceland in the 1780s. And I went through a research period where I was reading a lot of founding fathers type texts, and they all reference these volcanoes in the 1780s because it shut down summer for 1 year. I want to say 1783. So the idea is that you can release a lot of functionally silicon into the stratosphere and cool down the planet for a set period of time. It is completely possible technologically for humans to inject a very small amount of silica, I don't quite remember, through processes that exist right now, and you could cool the planet down by 1 or 2 degrees. I think that I'm seeing that idea pop up more and more. I think that this is going to be a completely mainstream idea in the next 10 years or so. I'm certainly not saying I'm for it. I just think it's a reality. It's going to happen. We're not going to meet these climate goals. We're going to be an indoor species until that happens. And after that happens, one of the side effects is that the sky is going to turn white. This is probably the last decade where we're going to have a blue sky. And so I would say, like, go out and enjoy it, because this is all very temporary, I think. And we all know that things are going to get markedly worse. I now feel like this Trump period was maybe a nice little like introductory course in how things are going to be. Shit's going to get a lot worse. And so it's hard for me to make any predictions about underground culture, because all of the variables are going to be so utterly different to the world that I lived in. I mean, some of them are already. Like, what was gasoline in 1990? Like a nickel? It was nothing, you know? And if you're a touring band now, you have to really struggle to do all the things that we took for granted just because of that one variable, just because gas was so much cheaper back then. But I'm sorry, I'm still connecting the dots. So all this stuff I'm talking about, I mean, it's so depressing that you can shut down. I don't take it that way. I think that us being an indoor species is also temporary. I think that there probably will be some technological solutions that we haven't thought of yet. I'm sort of a long-term optimist, even though I'm a short-term pessimist. But the day-to-day mechanics of just all of our lives are going to be so incredibly different 20 years from now. It's not going to be the same as us looking back at the year 2000 and like, isn't it funny that we all have little pocket computers now? It's going to be it's so alien. What's waiting for us on the other side is so alien to our way of life now that I can't make any predictions on that. So I would say to all of you, if you're people that enjoy going out and going to shows, like, do it. But you know, TikTok, get your enjoyment in.
Well, yeah, that's not what I was expecting.
Yeah, that came out really harsh. I'm sorry.
But I think it's good. It's maybe in true Sam fashion, you know, that we get some doomsday prophecies. So thank you for that. And
yeah, it's not totally doomsday. Like, it's I mean, if we all had to live indoors, well, people in Minneapolis do that for half the year anyway, you know? People in Dubai do that for most of the year. It just means a radical change. It doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world. I think the world will continue. It's just going to look very different.
Well, thanks, Sam. Donovan put a question in the chat that I wish he had put in there earlier. So you can read it there on your own. But I think we'll wrap up now, just because I want to be attentive to people's attention spans. And Sam, you already gave us more time than we had agreed on. So we do really appreciate it. Thanks for time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I'm going to put that dark thing up on, I guess on Medium or wherever I should be doing that. I'll do that in the next few days. And I'll put a thing on my Instagram account.
Great.
Link you to that.
Well, thanks. Yeah. Thanks again for talking with us. I hope everybody enjoyed the discussion. I hope those of you who haven't read the book, pick up a copy sometime soon. It's a really rad book. And I think that, I think to weather the indoor age, it'll be a useful tool, at least to understand what came before.
Also, hey, what's up, Justin? I see you there. We should catch up. Sorry, I know that I'm abusing this.
Oh, no, you're not abusing it. That's what we do here in our virtual hangouts.
Okay. Well, thanks again for having me.
Yeah, man. Thanks again. Yeah. And hopefully we'll, maybe see you IRL one of these days.
Yes. Someday.
Okay, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks.